to keep.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the 50th New York Film Festival. My name is Eugene Hernandez from the Film Society of Lincoln Center, and I want to welcome you all to the latest in our free evening conversations we're doing here most nights during the festival. The next event, we had an event scheduled for tomorrow, and because of some scheduling conflicts, that event is canceled. So our next talk will be on Friday, and actually it's going to be a really cool conversation. David Thompson, who's a really cool writer, is going to be doing the very first conversation and book signing for his new book, which comes out next week. So we invite you back here at 7 o'clock on Friday. And then Saturday at 4:30, we're having a conversation with Richard Pena, who's retiring from the Film Society this year from the position of program director, and that'll be across the street in the Furman Gallery, 4:30 on Saturday. So glad you could join us for these free conversations, and welcome to those who are watching from around the world on YouTube. This event is streaming live on YouTube, as are all of our conversations. So if you can't be here in person, go to youtube.com/filmlink or visit filmlink.com to watch live or to watch after the fact. I just want to thank our friends at SAGIndie, and I want to thank Michael Sladek for all the help putting this terrific panel together. What a great group. Hello to everyone. Welcome. And without further ado, I'll hand over the conversation to Michael. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So, my name is Michael Sladek. I'm a filmmaker and a member of SAG-AFTRA, as well as the New York representative for SAGIndie, which is an organization that tries to bridge the gap between independent filmmakers, low-budget independent filmmakers, and SAG-AFTRA actors. So welcome. We're going to be talking about the development process, the casting process, and the process of working with actors, and mostly in low-budget films, independent films. But we can probably do some comparative discussions with this group here because we've got a bunch of people who've worked on numerous levels in the industry. So very briefly, I'll introduce everyone here and just kind of give you a quick rundown of some of the titles that they're associated with. Note that this is everybody has a lot of experience on this panel. So what I'm telling you is not just the 4 films that they've made. They've made a lot more films than this. So I encourage you all to go look them up and follow their work. So on the end here we have Bruce Weiss. He's a producer. Some of the titles he's been involved in are Interview, Trust, Simple Men, and The Unbelievable Truth. Next to him is Ms. Ellen Parks, who's a casting director. Some of her titles include Secretary, Flirting with Disaster, Great Gardens, Fur, An Imaginary Portrait of Diane Arbus, and Spanking the Monkey. Paul Schnee, next to me, is also a casting director. A few of the films that he's been involved with are August Osage County, Pitch Perfect, Compliance, The Help, Winter's Bone, and actually he cast a film with Rye over here, Nobody Walks. And then on my right, Tom Donahue is a director, producer. Some of his credits include Casting By, which is actually at New York Film Festival. Did it already premiere or is it premiering tomorrow night? Friday night. It premieres Friday night. Which is a documentary about the casting process. I'll let you explain it because I haven't even seen it yet, so what do I know? But other ones include Ponies, Guest of Cindy Sherman, and Washington Heights. Russo-Young is next to Tom. Her new film, Nobody Walks, is actually opening on the 19th here in LA. It was at Sundance and won a film festival award there. Her other films include The Color Wheel, You Won't Miss Me, and Hannah Takes the Stairs. And then last but not least is Mr. Larry Fessenden, who's a director, producer, actor. Some of his titles include Wendigo, Wendy and Lucy, The Last Winter, I Sell the Dead, and Habit. So, there we go. So why don't we begin at the beginning? Let's start at the very, very beginning of a film with the idea. So, when does casting come into your head? When you're first writing or first coming with a process, with a project, with an idea, like Larry, when are you thinking about it from the very beginning, or is it something sort of nebulous, or is it different for every project?
I think as I do write my own scripts, so I often start to have a fantasy actor. And it's mostly about type. And it's not that I'm scheming about how to get the film made, but very soon after the script is finished, then it turns into another consideration, which is how to raise the money and attract, build what's known as the package, which is presumably the director of some note, and then the actors. That really seems to be the way now to get the heat around a project. So that's how it starts. At first it's a creative thing, which is how a movie usually begins, but then eventually becomes more practical. And then you realize there's a lot of types that fit that bill, and then you start considering salaries and budget and all that. Then the realities come caving in.
So when you say type at the beginning, when you say type, are you really thinking of a type, or are you thinking of, of a Harrison Ford type, or are you thinking of Harrison Ford? You know what I'm saying?
I actually haven't written for Harrison.
But we were just talking
But
about
I mean,
so
I'll be very candid and say that I have a role for Philip Seymour Hoffman. But someone else reads it and they say, oh, is it Brian Cox would be good in this? And you go, well, okay. So there's a type going on there. You may have a reason why you want one actor because you're fond of him, or something, you've seen him in a film and that's where your focus is. But then you realize, well, that there's a range of actors. And it's actually amazing, and I think most movies, and even some of our favorite movies, how far the actual final cast is from the original ideas. And yet you can't imagine that Nicholson play, anyone but Nicholson playing McMurphy. But of course it was originally Kirk Douglas wanted to play that role forever in Cuckoo's Nest. So it goes on and on. There's a lot of great stories out there. I'm sure you know half of them,
Well, I interviewed Paul Haggis about Crash, and at about 4 years before he finally got the film made, he was going around with the script and couldn't get it off the ground. And then he got two casting directors involved, Sarah Finn and Randy Hiller, and they put together an entire cast, most of whom didn't end up in the final film. They put together one version of the cast, and that's a good 30 speaking parts. And then a year goes by, and then they almost get the financing, and then they lose it. Half the actors drop out due to scheduling conflicts, and they finally get the money again. It's an entirely new cast. Half of them then drop out. And so the final film had an entirely different cast than it was 3 years before, and I think that's common. And I think when you think about actors at a very early stage of development, always be open to, you may not get Philip Seymour Hoffman, but you're going to get some sort of Philip Seymour Hoffman type. You will.
Well, how about Narai? I mean, for instance, you've worked on a lot of films. Well, I think everybody's worked on a lot of films that are not star-driven films necessarily. Is there, when you're starting off with a new project, is it necessarily that you're thinking of somebody with a name or just a type, and that type happens to fit that person, or is it your friend?
Well, for Nobody Walks, actually, we were thinking about Peter Sarsgaard. He was our type as the father. Sort of the lead role. And then that didn't happen, but we kind of went out to people sort of in the same engaged interest and felt it out, and Paul can also speak more to this because he did a wonderful job with it. But I actually met with John Krasinski for a different part, and when he walked in, nothing like Peter Sarsgaard particularly in type, but he had a charisma and an upbeatness that I thought that the character had that Peter Sarsgaard I thought could have had. I mean, I don't even understand the connection completely, but the more I talked to him, and on that first meeting, it was like, this guy should play this part. And he's in the movie now and plays the father, and I think does, in some ways, maybe is more right for the role, actually, than Sarsgaard. So I think, for me, the casting process would have been, who knows. But, I mean, I love Peter Sarsgaard, but the process, I think, helped us actually get closer and understand the movie even further in a way of casting.
So now, so Bruce, like, what, from a producer's point of view, if you meet a young or whatever filmmaker who has his images in their head of who they want, or just an image of something, how do you, as a producer, kind of handle what someone's coming to you with? In the early stages, I'm talking about well before you have money, well before you have anything.
No, I agree. I think you have to start with a wish list, but you also have to have you can't have your hopes pinned on one person, obviously. I think, yeah, you do start with a type. When I read a script for the first time, I generally sort of form a type in my mind of the leading characters. It really depends on, where it's coming from. I did a trilogy of films that were directed by Steve Buscemi and Stanley Tucci and John Turturro. And I didn't actually approach them as actors. I approached them as directors. Ultimately, they wanted to play the lead parts, but they also had the ability to call some friends who could play the other parts. So I think you try, as a producer, you just try to see where the dots are connected and try to sort of work through whatever relationships will further the project. Yeah.
Now, maybe, did you want to say something? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, please, go for it.
I can chime in on this. I think one of the things that we as casting directors run up against is a director's, let us say, prototype, which is not realistic. What we know about lower budget indie films is that we're not going to get Clint Eastwood to play that lead, although he may be perfect in it. He might be the first person who leaps to mind if you polled 15 or 20 of your friends or colleagues. However, we can take that prototype and then generate lists and other ideas that will be more realistic. I think that it also goes back a little further. The writer is often the director with indie films. They double duty. So it would be, one of my great dreams would be a director who writes roles which are castable. So if he's writing a role for which he needs, or she needs Clint Eastwood in the lead, we know that we're not going to be able to afford anybody of that caliber on the kind of a budget that a low budget has. So why not write a different story with a slightly younger lead in it? But there are certain echelons of talent, so that the Clint Eastwoods of the world, then there's another layer of talent. And at that point, we, the casting people, run up against the requirements of the financiers who will not make the movie unless we cast out of that top tier. And we're constantly between a rock and a hard place if there is no flexibility in this matter.
Well, the only thing I would add to it is that I think the flexibility has to come from, I guess, both the director and / writer, if it's the same person, and the producer, in the sense of at whatever point whenever the point comes, but we just want to make the movie, period. And I think that, what I try to do, I'm sure what we all try to do as part of the creative team is say, do you want to wait and wait and wait and wait until you raise $3 million or whatever it is, or is there a way to make this movie for $400,000 and make it with great theater actors from New York or whatever level of actor you want to talk about, and make the movie, and then we'll all see each other at Sundance next year, and we'll make it and we'll get it done, as opposed to holding out for that, Phil Hoffman or whoever it is that's probably never gonna do the movie.
Well, you see that a lot. For a film, they come to you with $3 million, and then it goes down to $500,000.
Yes. And most of the time, in my relatively limited experience, when seeing the finished movie, I see it and I'm like, that's the movie that should have been made. Mm-hmm. It's not a $5 million movie with 50 speaking parts, and it's a $300,000 movie with 50 speaking parts, and it's gritty and it's shot on location in New York or Boston or wherever.
Do you feel like
and
you have to go through that? Do you feel like you have to go through that process?
Not all the time, but more often than because I think, as Bruce said, there's just certain realities that you won't get money if these requirements aren't met, and I think the threshold is lowering somewhat, where now the middle class movie has been kind of, we work on things that are, $80 to $100 million budget, and then way at the lower end of like a couple hundred, 300,000, 400,000, 2 million. It's not much in between.
Well, the top line, the amount that studios paid at Toronto was $2 million. So you really need to make your film for $1 million these days. What used to be 3 to 5 is now $1 million.
Yeah. So
go ahead. Just as a reality, in terms of raising financing, Yeah, it's obviously it's a talent to budget ratio. And if you're, I mean, unless your uncle is financing the film, if you're trying to raise funds from somebody who's actually in the industry, they have approval over cast. Anybody who's giving you money is going to have approval.
We made a movie just to paint a portrait of how this might go. We had the financing because I work in the horror genre. So the cool thing about horror is that it's technically the genre that is the star. So you have a little more leeway. At the same time, this company had expectations, and they have these terribly nasty lists, which is whether an actor will help with foreign sales. And somebody that we all may love in this country means absolutely nothing elsewhere, and those are always very puzzling, and you just have to become used to knowing that that's out there. But anyway, we did what Paul was mentioning. We had a part of, the head vampire guy in this post-apocalyptic story. And it might have been a Willem Dafoe role or something like that. But we got Michael Cerveris, who is an amazing Tony Award-winning New York Broadway actor. So on the one hand, he didn't mean a lot, but he was awesome in the movie. And then we found Kelly McGillis, who is in Top Gun, but she hadn't worked for authentic talent to the story. And then you have sort of a name that's a little faded, but it's exciting to announce she's back in the business, horror story no less. And then we got a kid from TV, and you see, so there are ways to put this together, but you need financiers who are going to be receptive to these shenanigans. And my whole thing as a producer when I do that is to have the movie tell a story, which is to say the story of the cast that you've chosen. And as I say, so we're taking from Broadway, we're taking from a faded star, and hopefully you can create something unique out of that, because otherwise you are literally going to the same 10 people, Tom Hardy and whoever the fuck else. It's unbelievable. It's always Tom Hardy. It's like, who even heard of Tom Hardy? But you got to have him in your movie to get it financed. And I always say, did anyone go to that wrestler movie or the about the brothers? It's like, I don't know that Tom Hardy is bringing the money in. He happens to have been in Batman.
Well,
but
there's
it's
a
just
whole
strange who gets on the list.
Ellen just raised
2 years ago,
Mike,
Paul and I were begging our producers to cast Tom Hardy, and they were going, meaningless, doesn't mean anything.
Makes no
Don't
sense.
worry, he's not on the international sales
It's
list."
crazy.
And then he breaks out, and then they all want Tom Hardy, and I'm sorry, he's gone.
And the other thing, not to just turn this into a bitch session, but
please, bitch.
there are these wonderful actors out there like Jeremy Renner, and you think, well, he's in the Bomb movie, and so he's gonna, whatever it's called, Hurt Locker, and he's an indie guy, and he came up through I even know a director who worked with him, and all of this, and then they get sucked into the franchises, and Mark Ruffalo, all these people who you thought were on our team, and bless them for their getting their work, but they become untouchable. So in a weird way, it's cool that the franchises are hiring good actors, but it's making it very difficult to make old-fashioned dramas.
Well, what about on the level? What about on the level of like, we're looking at the Mumblecore films. I mean, you're using people that are not, the Safdie brothers never used. I mean, who did?
I'm
well,
in a
that's a good
Mumblecore
point.
movie.
So,
No,
huh?
I'm just.
Do you have any insights on that, right?
I think in terms of Nobody Walks, like I mean, we really made that movie for very, very little money, and we shot on Super 16. We were like 21 days. I come from a Mumblecore background of making 2 films literally for under $100,000, and played festivals with those films. But we had John Krasinski, Rosemary DeWitt, Olivia Thirlby, Justin Kirk, and Dylan McDermott's in one scene, and was like, sure, I'll come, to dinner that night and be in that scene. It's a part I've never played before. I'm playing a rock star who's at dinner with a family. And I feel like the collection that we got was really impressive, actually. I don't know how much, I don't think that they mean a lot in terms of our financing was not contingent on those actors, and so I don't think they mean a lot in the foreign sales area. But I think that it really makes the movie really strong and is different and kind of paints a new world.
Well, was it a very different experience from the films that you had made before that were kind of Mumblecore world?
Yeah, so the 2 films that I made before is a movie called You Won't Miss Me that was at Sundance, and it's called You Won't Miss Me. And I basically sat down with a really good friend of mine that I'd known since I was 5 years old, and we said, we didn't know if it was going to be a movie or a short film or what, or an installation, an art installation. And we sat down and we created a character together from scratch for her to play in the movie, because she wanted to be an actress and was into acting and taking classes and all of that. And we wrote this biography, and then I sat and I interviewed the character for 3 hours and said, like, so where'd you go to school? What was your favorite movie in high school? And what was the story? When did you first make out with a boy? And we did this extensive process and then kind of constructed an outline from who that character was and started to think of, like, what are scenes that this character would be in. And the movie kind of came about that way, which is a very unconventional process from, for example, working with Lena Dunham in Nobody Walks, where we sat down and we kind of wrote a script together from A to B, and then we sent that script out to actors. So I think sort of just comparing the two processes, in a Mumblecore way, there's so much more creative freedom to cast whoever you want to experiment with different kinds of, we shot You Won't Miss Me on 5 formats, and we were literally like, shooting a flip camera. We'd walk through Lincoln Center with a flip camera in our character, or then we'd go and we'd, crash a hotel lobby and bring our character in there. So there was like a really inspiring, let's just go make this movie right now. Whereas Nobody Walks, we're dealing with, okay, you have, one day in this location, you have to shoot 4 scenes from the movie in this time. But I'm also working with actors who can go in there and just get their shit done. And that's been that was incredible for me as a director, because it was actually a lot less work in some ways than coaxing a person who's a non-actor into being, it's okay, just have another glass of whiskey.
Hey, but actors will work for whiskey. That's true.
I just wanted to respond to something that you had said before in terms of, Mark Ruffalo won't do this anymore. And this is a question I think also for
I didn't actually mean to say that, because I think he would, but I'm saying he's sort of busy for 6 more Hulk movies. That's really.
But here's the other thing: whether it's Mark Ruffalo or take your pick of any name actors, I think, one of the big problems is even getting the talent to see the material. Right, and that's obviously where a helpful casting director.
It's a very good segue. That was my next question. So how do you, at
Right.
this point, when you say, okay, we're not going to make a Mumblecore movie, we're not going to make a horror movie that with possibly people who nobody knows, for whatever reason, whether it's financing, blah, blah, blah. What's the next step?
It is definitely the casting agent, because unless you have a personal relationship to an individual actor, that's what the casting agent provides, is a relationship, and it's what you're saying, to the agents and the managers, because you want to get that script into the hands of the handlers, and you just hope to God that they respond or they see it. This is the other thing, it's not so much about the material, it's about where the actor is in their career. If they should do something upbeat, maybe they're known for comedy and they want to do a dark film, like we've seen. I won't list them because I have no memory anymore, but you know what I mean. There's plenty of examples where actors will depart from what they're known, and that's the best time to get them, and that's the strategy. And you can work with a casting person to find those little sweet spots. And maybe Ruffalo's coming off of 2 Hulks and he's ready to do a real script, for example. So.
Well, yeah, if you look like at a John Hawkes, you got to think, John Hawkes would probably like to not play a creepy guy for a while, right?
Yes, and he doesn't. And the Sessions is amazing when you get a chance to see it when it comes out. I didn't work on it. I'm just saying, he's unrecognizable. But the other thing too that speaks to your point a little bit about what we do, unfortunately, for a large part of our day is talk to agents and managers, which is not always all that pleasant, but it does, part of what I guess our value is to a filmmaker is just to know what actors are up to and what they want to do based on these conversations that we have with agents all day. So, neither of us is, I don't think, I can't, maybe you can, is able to get an actor to like something. But if, I won't, without mentioning names, there was an actor who wasn't in franchise movies, but was basically in a lot of big budget studio romantic comedies. And then he did a relatively small film that was at Sundance this past January, 2012. And I was talking to his agent, whom I know a little bit, and he said, actor's name here, had the best time here. He's never been to Sundance, and he wants to do more of these. So send him our way. You know, he'll make his money on a Disney movie or whatever, and then he really wants to. And I never really knew that about. I always assumed this particular actor was just kind of out of reach. But he's won Sundance experience. He had a great time, and who knows if he'll ever do another one. It's just the point is that part of what we bring to a project is some vague sense of knowledge of what people are, instinct of what actors are out there looking to do. I mean, it's relatively easy to say, yeah, you're not going to get, Harrison Ford to do this. It's just not going to happen.
But I think that what you're saying is also interesting is that one way to pitch an independent film is to say that you can offer authenticity in some way.
You can offer
and they can actually act,
yeah.
and there's a script that has some depth, and
Totally.
and in concept, actors have gone into the profession to express themselves and to explore that, and so you just need to get past the agent who gets a better fee on a bigger movie. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even an agent can be led to understand that this will raise the stature of the actor, the credibility, the street cred, and so on. So it's a fun game to work with, and it gives you the confidence to. You can still try to go to Mr. Ruffalo, but the other thing to know is that can be a 3-week to 3-month wait. So there's this whole other element of your schedule, your patience, your ability to sustain interest in your project, and there's still
Just have a question for the casting directors. If you make an offer to Mark Ruffalo, how long do you wait to get an answer back? How long do you give the agent?
A month at least.
Yeah.
At least.
Depends on the budget, depends on the role, if it's something he's done. Because Mark has some range, but not a lot of range. He's probably done something close to it already, and at a larger budget with better benefits, a nicer trailer, and a more auspicious supporting cast. So basically, when I'm working with someone new, I say, look, the reason a name value actor is going to do this movie is almost entirely because it offers something that is creatively enticing. That if it is subject matter that is interesting, that's great. But the role itself has to be very enticing, and it has to be something. Probably has to be something, if we're approaching marquee talent, that actor will not be offered sometime down the road for better money, and with an A-list director and people he has known or worked with before. So that is actually the strength of indie films, is not to be conventional, middle of the road, but to take the story in another direction that this actor would never be able or be allowed or invited to go any other time or any other place. That's why I'm so excited when I find a director who will write that kind of material and who also incorporates that kind of freedom of thinking, where we can ask a more established actor who has the skill to try a very different role that will be creatively attractive to them.
So how do the two of you how do you choose which projects you're going to work on?
Well, for me, I also, just for logistical purposes, I have a business partner who we have an office in LA. His name is Kerry Barden, and so he and I are credited together on everything, even though depending on the project, some more work is done in LA, more is done here, whatever. Having said all that, we, like any small business owners, we read everything and we just talk about it. And if if it's not something one or both of us feels passionate about, we'll pass on that.
But are you talking about submitted scripts? Are you talking about going out and seeing stuff?
Submitted scripts. We have an agent who sort of feels that stuff for us. So a lot of stuff gets emailed directly, and you just have to, could read as much as you can, and you fall in love with something, and you really want to do it. That's not to say that, we cast the reboot of Conan the Barbarian, which I don't think anyone in this room or country saw. But there's always a job you do for, to make some money. So, that enables you to do some other movies that, that might not,
I think it also really depends, on what kind of movie you're making. And I think that there is so much to be said for the freedom of the independent, really low-budget film, because there's so many amazing actors. I just saw Argo last night, and I saw Christopher Denham in that. And I was so thrilled to see him in that movie, because I sort of had my eye on wanting to work with him for years, and I don't think anybody knows who he is. And, Ben Affleck cast him in that movie, and he's amazing in it. And I just, there's just so many incredible actors that I think are floating everywhere that aren't in that upper echelon. And if you are going to make a movie for not a lot of money, or your grandma or whatever it is, then to find those people and to go to Lee Strasberg and start poking around, I think makes a lot of sense. And that's something that I actually wish I'd done on my first movie, as opposed to kind of turning to high school friends and saying, will you be in my movie, please? You were really good in the play, So
I'm just reminded that I had the pleasure of making a horror film this August with teenagers, which in this case you cast 20 to 24-year-olds for reasons of SAG rules. But that's exciting because you really don't have the burden of looking at their careers and using a name. You're actually casting, as it used to be, by auditioning. And it speaks to, you really see the role played out over and over as people audition. You get, it's such an education to sort of have the script read by an actor and ambitious young folk who are trying to get the role. So they're so exciting to cast for young parts, because you don't quite have the burden unless they've been on a TV show as a child star. They simply aren't expected to have a long resume.
Yeah, that's another great segue. So the casting process itself, are most of you guys dealing with casting sessions for lead roles? Are your directors that you're working with, producers you're working with, sitting in on casting sessions for secondary roles, etc.? Or how are you? Is it?
It all
depends.
on
If you want
the client.
Yeah.
I think probably the most enjoyable and joyous processes that I've been through with directors have been actually directors who have been established enough that they can make their own choices without the infringement of producers or financial concerns. And those were people like David O. Russell in his third film, and Alexander Payne, and the Coens, who I started out with early in my career, who basically just cast the right people for the roles. It is an extraordinary creative process, all the fine-tuning that happens. And it gives us, in the casting profession, such a wonderful sense of ability to contribute when they say, bring me the people you think are right. And we can bring people out of relative obscurity, like Thomas Hayden Church and Virginia Madsen for Sideways. We can bring them up and out into the public eye in a way that is totally refreshing and illuminating and wonderful. That's so rare. As a matter of fact, with Sideways, which was with
Paul
no, I'm thinking of something else, but the producers, when we started casting Sideways, Alexander said, we want to discover the real people who would be in these roles. And at the same time, the producers at Fox were getting phone calls, desperate phone calls from George Clooney and Brad Pitt, who wanted to play the roles. And Alexander took their phone calls and said, listen, guys, nobody in the universe is going to watch this movie and believe you to be two drunken losers. You will not tell my story in the way that I intend for it to be told. So another time, okay?
Do you have insight into
and of course
almost
the Fox
opposite
producers
choice?
were like, no! You know,
What
like
about, do you know how About Schmidt happened? Were you involved with that? Because
I
there
wasn't
they
in the-
chose to have Nicholson
Yeah, I know.
as a loser, and
But
it
that
worked.
gave him his ability to cast
Right.
Sideways the way he wanted to.
Which
That
was to
that
have
was
a-
those were his terms. He
Yeah.
had cast approval, and Fox did not, and they could say nothing about it. But
So-
the Coens do that too, basically. That's really wonderful. Way to
Well,
work.
you just made a movie about casting. So, and I assume you've interviewed a lot of folks about this process. So, have you found that this is sort of a theme with most people, or is there a big swath that looks at it differently? Especially the casting directors.
In terms of what, though?
In terms of the process, in terms of finding the right people for the right roles.
I think, well, one question that I have is, do you guys think that the quality of independent films is lowered because you can't actually audition your leads, because you have to make offers to people who you have to just assume and trust the casting director that they're going to actually be able to perform the parts?
Cast a film a number of years ago that the third choice was Nicole Kidman for the lead. And it was a film about Diane Arbus. And if anyone knows who Diane Arbus was, she was a tiny, petite, Jewish, dark-haired, wonderfully unself-conscious, unself-absorbed human being who created a world around her by virtue of looking outside herself.
So Nicole
Now
Kidman
that
was
is
spot
not
on.
Nicole Kidman in any way, shape, or form. And because the producers wanted her in the movie instead of Samantha Morton, for instance, or Rachel Weisz, or somebody who was more appropriate, the whole movie changed its shape and proportion. All of the world that Diane Arbus was photographing, all of which we spent 6 months finding, the dwarves, the people with tattoos, with piercings, the transvestites, the dominatrixes, the midgets, the burlesque people, all of those people we spent 6 months finding. Suddenly they were stripped from the movie, and every scene was about Nicole Kidman prancing around in a beautiful dress. So, yeah, and that movie, which the producers thought was going to make them a lot of money, did not. Because the cast was wrong. The key cast was wrong.
Right, I think after a great script, the next thing is the cast. And if you get the cast wrong, you're
Yeah.
dead out of the gate
Yeah.
with the most brilliant director.
Another example in that was Ty Burrell played her husband, a very dramatic role, very somber, dramatic role. And he was brilliant at it. But because he was supporting a woman who in no way belonged in the lead, in my experience, the connection was wrong. So, I mean, it can go really poorly astray.
So,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
just interested actually in sort of the casting director's process with different directors and what it's like working with, because you guys get to work with so many, such a variety, and how often, sort of, what is that process like, and do you find there's a huge range in terms of the collaboration with the directors and when they listen and when they don't, when you're frustrated, and because I can imagine.
Yes.
I mean, we had a great time, but
I mean, it depends. Like Alan said, it depends on the director. Some directors want to meet in person, shake hands with, look in the eye of everyone who's going to say a word in their movie. Some directors will bring in, I don't know, a dozen, 20, 25 people to audition for the waiter, and then the director will look online. Used to be DVDs. Before that, it was VHS. Look at the auditions online and say, "Oh, I'll do a callback session with these 5," or they'll just say, "Yeah, that girl. Let's just cast her." So it really depends. I mean, some directors. I worked with a director last year who we were very caught up with the lead. It was sort of an ensemble film, and I kept reminding him that there was like a gardener and a security guard, speaking parts that he had written that we had to cast. And he didn't know until after the fact that he actually enjoyed just looking at the stuff on, I shouldn't say just, reviewing the auditions online and picking from, it sort of freed him up. He didn't know he could do that until he did it.
But it's not really a good way to cast. By not having the director mix it up in the audition?
I don't see why not. I think it can be. I'm not sure you'd want to, cast, like Compliance, just use an example of a recent project we did. I don't think you'd want to cast a tight ensemble film with where 2, 3, 4 people are in one scene. You wouldn't want to cast that way. But, when you're working on a low-ish budget, you've got to budget your time as a director between location scouting and doing other things. And if you just don't have the literal time to sit in a callback session with 6 people for, 20 speaking roles, day players, then I think if your instincts are right, then yeah, I think it's a perfectly fine way to cast. I think I've heard some people cast their whole movie like that. I don't know.
I just finished a Mumblecore film that I cast in about a month's time, and completely remote from the director. She never came into town, and basically she just decided she wanted just to hear people tell a little personal anecdote. And I'd send her 6 people who'd taped themselves and posted it online, and she went, "Oh, I love her. Oh, she'd be wonderful in the part," and it was done. Each role was like that. It was wonderful, and we got it done.
like
And it was a
cyber-casting.
brilliantly, because it sprang from her own sensibility, her own imagination of how she'd written it, and she also then developed the roles around the actors whom she fell in love with. So that was really charming and kind of a wonderful relief in the casting process. Then I have people who will ask me to have people called back and do work sessions and come back again and tell their life stories and discuss how their mother abused them for months and months and months and months, and still not make up their mind. You know?
Did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to, for a moment, speak about this casting agent that I worked with and how much I appreciated. This is the story of me casting these younger kids. And it was just so wonderful how nurturing she was and how she had really followed these kids and how she spoke about these kids very specifically, each one, how they were growing in their career. And you realize what an essential and truly nurturing and a process of discovery this role can be, especially with the younger. I mean, so there's sort of 2 things going on. You're going to plays and you're discovering young talent, and then of course you're dealing with agents and established stars, and those are in some way 2 different agendas, and I suppose the best are doing both of those things. But I did want to celebrate this woman's approach and how nurturing her role was, and as a result she got me just this amazing ensemble of 6 kids that are stuck in a 16-foot boat, and I would just do scenes and let them play out, and they were all so awesome, and it was very much the people she brought for me to audition and that process. Also, I never cast anyone from tape. I love being in the room. That's when I felt, and we had all these people auditioning from LA, and I got to admit I just stopped watching them. I was not responding, and I had the privilege of being able to be in a New York room with these kids and call them back and really get a sense of them.
Well, I think if you're a director, it's foolish not to be in the audition room, because you actually get a better sense of your character. You can find a better way to tell your scenes, to tell your story. I think it's really important to be in the room.
And
if
one
possible.
character was supposed to be a dumb jock, but I love this actor, and we ended up rewriting it, so he had the same resentments. It was the same storyline, but he was smart, and that's what was making him so frustrated. And he had an older brother who was the dumb jock. Anyway, it was there you go. I mean, the actor actually led the rewriting, and
Yeah, it puts you in a position of rethinking.
you're
Certainly,
being
and
creative.
it should.
God forbid. I mean, you're actually responding
that's
to
the beauty.
your clay. You
The
know?
beauty of it is that it's a collaborative process, and even the collaborative process of putting together a cast, like you just said, it can change your film.
And you're balancing things. You're like, I really like this guy for that character, so maybe I should be thinking a little differently about this character.
Yeah, my own first film, we were making this film about a Nebuchadnezzar Jewish boy, and we were looking for a Nebuchadnezzar Jew, and this redheaded, Irish guy comes in, and we're like, this is never, and he was brilliant. He was brilliant, and we were just like, oh my God, all right, so could he be a redheaded guy?
Well,
does he still has to be Jewish? Does he give, and so it makes, which is great, which is the way it should be. It should be.
You also learn if the actor can listen and actually be directed, which on tape, it could seem like the best line readings ever, but then you get him on camera and they can't vary or take direction in any way.
Yeah, listening is the key. If they're not listening, if they're just thinking about what they look like, then you're gone.
I'm
You're
just
gone.
going to say one little thing about tape, which is I really like to be in the room, and then I also like to go home and watch me in the room with the actor or just the actor on tape, because I actually feel like having that distance of watching somebody on a screen where I'm not kind of so involved in that and just sitting back and seeing kind of what the viewer will eventually be watching is really important for me to get that distance. But it's great to work with them also, and then you can also really critique and learn more about the script.
And we're doing more and more. I think we did a couple with you actually, where you were here. There were some actors in LA, or you were in LA, and the actors were here. Where they were, I would tape it like I would normally, and I can't remember who was where, but someone was on a Skype on a laptop like here, and there the actress was there reading, and they were talking and working the scene, and I was taping it, and I would have it then, posted up on our website for Rye to look at as though she were in the room. Yeah, it's probably, I don't know, I can't speak for you, it's probably not ideal, but it's better than, having to ask some 22-year-old girl to put herself on a plane and that sort of thing. So things are getting a little easier, and not perfect, but, and we're doing that on bigger and bigger movies too, where someone's filming in Vancouver, and so,
It's interesting, from having been on both sides of the process in terms of casting and many years ago being an actor, going out, I think most actors feel like the auditioning process is hellish and utterly dehumanizing or just unfair. You feel rushed, you feel like you've got all these jitters, you're going in, you're meeting new people, you're expected to reach these depths like boom, like on a turn of a dime. So, I know with us, we try to give actors as much time as possible, but there comes a point where you just are there forever, right? I mean, so how do you balance, wanting to get great performances out of people? I mean, when you're seeing 100 people, or in a day or whatever it is, how do you guys balance like being able to give an actor the chance to, I don't want to say shine, but I'm going to say shine.
Well, what we do initially is we really get an overview. We do pre-screens way to get sense of how this actor works and how to work with them. So if they're good enough to bring back in callbacks, then we know how to guide them and help the director get the list of the performance. There comes a point, I think it's instinctual for us, because we're with this all the time, where we know it's not going to get any better, or there's really no point going further, or they're just really not quite in the pocket. But I agree with Rye that it's really important to have the actor taped, because the casting process may go on for a year. And that's what happened with Secretary. The very first person we read for the lead in Secretary was Maggie Gyllenhaal. And she was right out of Columbia. She had no experience. She had no real credits. There was nothing to tell us that she could handle it, that she could carry the movie. We made then 13 different offers over the course of a year. One a month over the course of a year. Everybody passed because the material was too weird. And finally we were desperate. We didn't have a lead. And I said, I think you ought to look at that woman who came in the first day. He looked at it and he said, oh my God, I can't imagine anyone playing this better than she. Let's cast her. Of course, she was unknown. James Spader had come on by that time, and we had to send Spader the tape to take a look at whether he would like to act with this young girl who had no experience, no credits. He didn't. He was in LA. He looked at it and he said, she's fantastic. I would love to get in her, work with her. So it all just worked out beautifully.
I think that's also just like what you said sort of brought up another issue, which is that sometimes casting is like a house of cards in terms of, if you get one actor on, then another actor wants to work with that actor. And so they want to jump on the project. And then if you have those two, you could draw a third actor. And you guys can speak much more eloquently to that.
It also defines, as you go along, it's kind of the house of cards that you're building, because when you get key people in, it changes the timbre, the tone, the color, the flavor of the thing. I was working on a film for the last couple of years where we kept getting 5 leads attached, and then the money didn't flow in. So those people would drop out. So we started out with Joaquin Phoenix and Mia Wasikowska and Susan Sarandon and Amy Adams, and they couldn't raise the money off those people. And then Joaquin fell out, and Amy was like this, and then we got a young guy from Britain named Andrew Garfield to replace Joaquin. And then everything reconfigured. And Andrew stayed for about 9 months, and then it all fell apart again. So as we keep replacing the key players, the nature, the tone, the flavor of it changes. Now we have Jim Sturgis and what's her name? Oh, fuck, I can't remember who did that with him. Yeah, I guess it's drifting out of my mind. And Glenn Close has just come on, and that absolutely changes it from, it used to be Susan Sarandon, now it's Glenn Close. That adds a whole kind of definition and sharpness to it that sends the cast in a whole other direction.
Now, do you What about theater actors? Do you tend to see theater actors? Do you tend to stay away from that? Is that
Absolutely. I will see anybody who's right for it, and I'm sure Paul would agree.
There's a film that doesn't have a title that Christian Camargo, who's an actor who's in Dexter and the Twilight movies, directed. He is married to an actress named Juliet Rylance, whose father is Mark Rylance, who's one of the premier actors in the English-speaking world. But nobody knows who he is, unless you go to the theater. However, in this film that Christian wrote, because Mark agreed to be in it with his daughter, you know, the rest of the cast, for Christian Camargo, a first-time director, but who has a lot of acting experience, was making his first film as a director, because Mark is in it, who you wouldn't know him if you walked down the street. William Hurt, Allison Janney, Terry Jones, Jean Reno. I mean, it's just like everybody, you know, just Ben Whishaw is it? Yeah, Mark Rylance. Where do I sign up? He's also never available for movies because he's always doing theater in England. So, I mean, I'm talking about a very high caliber of a person. But just not to plug compliance, but Ann Dowd, who's the lead in compliance, has been acting in New York theater for 25 years, and now suddenly she's on Oscar watch, for that this tiny movie that not many people have seen, and those who stayed through to the end, who haven't walked out, have raved about. And you've known Anne for how? I mean, we've all known this is, she's in. It was just so gratifying to see her in the summer movies. New York Times thing as a breakout performer. It was her. And let's just say she's over 50, and then like 4 other actors who were all in their 20s or younger, and it was great.
It is an interesting. I think Rye's been sort of bringing it up over and over, and I think we're all saying it is somewhat. Let's come out and say it. It's extremely frustrating that there is this game you're playing with the financiers, and they have every right to this concern because it's just the way we intake media now. Unless I suppose you can win festivals and get your notoriety, but the bottom line is that there's so many movies where the fact that the cast is unknown would enhance the film and make it more authentic and have a sense of immediacy, and because you go in and an actor from a TV show, which is the norm now, and so you have a preconceived notion, and sometimes you want to actually play on the fact that these are real people in your story, and so it is damaging. Everything we're talking about is
it's a double-edged sword.
It's always been this way, but it's fun when you can finally break through somehow and cast good actors who are unknown. So,
Bruce, talk about since I know that this, talk about when the money comes and the money goes, the money comes, money goes. I mean, you get things set up, and when you name people like who some of the names that have just gone by, and I'm sure people go, how could this movie not get made when you have these names in it? We all understand that there are levels to this, but do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, the first word of advice I give anybody in the film business is, don't believe it when you get the check, you believe it when the check clears. Yeah, I mean, it's just this. I think all of us have experienced this. You have a project, you have which seems to be an amazing cast, and it's like aligning the planets. I mean, so many things have to line up for an independent film to come together. Suddenly you have an actor, but then the schedule changes, so you don't have the actor, and the financier that was backing that actor is now backed out, so you're constantly. It's like throwing a bunch of marbles on a table and trying to stop them from rolling off.
Well, do you think that there really are only like a handful of actors that really are the actors who can say this guy in this film is going to make this film not just get financed but sell?
There have been big films that have been financed with big stars that have totally flopped, right?
Well,
so
flop is
I think
flop.
the truth
Yeah,
is
sure.
nobody really knows. I mean, a film is so execution dependent, and so many things have to come together. I think anybody who tells you it's a sure thing from the beginning, that's impossible. You really don't know until you start to get into it, and there's so many elements that just have to work out just right. But the financing, it's. You're constantly subject to so many other people's opinions, and whims and schedules. It's a frustrating process. I'm in the middle right now. We just had this conversation sort of based on what Paul and Ellen were just talking about. I literally had a conversation yesterday with a director and with an actor, and we're going through a cast list. And, so now the question is, okay, well, yeah, Ben Stiller would be great for the lead, and, Maggie Gyllenhaal would be great for the female lead. But, maybe the director was asking him this question. It's actually his first film. He's saying, look, there are some older parts in here also. Does it help if we cast some older actors who people respect? Would that necessarily draw the other names? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And yeah, sometimes, right. So,
but that's
really,
what Rye was saying. It's
Right.
it's the alchemy of the whole thing. And even as a film goer, let's be honest, you go, oh, those two guys together? Well, that will be interesting. And it's in a comedy or, whatever, some version of that. Where that's what I meant when I say it's the story being told by the combination.
Right. But the one thing I will say, and again, I think real actors will respond to good material if they get a chance to see it. And that's really the battle, somehow finding a way to get the talent to see it.
Well, also just in a really grassroots thing to bring up again is that, I have gone up to act. I mean, I hate like going up to actors and being a total nerd, but I've totally gone up to actors before when I see them in a room, or you're at New York Film Festival and and I see an actor, and if I love them, someone mentioned Glenn Close, and I saw her the other night, and she was in a room, and I literally went up to her and was like, I'm obsessed with Damages. I think you're incredible. I remember when you said when you got the the award, she said that it was all about good writing, and that's what she was responding to. And it's, and she was like, thank you very much. And I was like, I'm an independent filmmaker, I'd like one day, hopefully we'll work together. And it's like, maybe she'll never remember that, but maybe someday in the next 20 years when I want to try to cast her, when she sees my face again, like, who knows? And so I think that there is some element of like, I don't know what that story was about, but just about really trying to make it happen from all sides, which I feel like
part
is
of what
true
this
about
story is
filmmaking.
about is whether you're an actor or you're an intern at IFC or whatever. I think is be nice to everyone all the time, because you never know. The intern who's working in my office in 5 years, he may be running Fox Searchlight. I don't know.
Or Glenn Close's best friend, and she says, I
Right.
just heard about this director, I'm thinking about doing this script. Oh, I hate Russo-Young. She sucks. She's terrible, and then, I was
Well,
like, Glenn Close.
it's not being nice to everybody, but there is also, I think, passion. Passion is, people feel passion. People feel when you really are into something, when you really give a shit about what it is that you're working on. And people want to work with people who are passionate, right? I mean, you don't want to work with people who are just kind of like in it just for the money necessarily. And so, that kind of an approach, as opposed to saying, can I have your autograph, or or whatever. It's not about stardom. It's about you love her work. You love this person's. You want to work with them. You think you're a good writer. You think you're a good enough filmmaker to do that, and to ooze that, and never to ooze sort of desperation. On the other hand, So
Well, that's also from the actor's point of view, and being a SAG forum. When you're auditioning, I think you're not necessarily auditioning, or your goal. That day you come in for one of us for whatever role, the odds are that you're probably not gonna get it just because of numbers. But I think your goal as an actor is to keep coming back, do well at that audition, and maybe you don't get it, but trust me, and I think maybe I don't know if you'll agree, the mental file of memorable auditions, interesting actors, creative actors, is not that big. So get yourself into that file, so that when something else that we're doing 2 years later, 6 months later, 4 years later, who was that girl who came in for the thing? She did that really weird audition. She was really funny, but she wasn't right for that. I'll go back and look at my notes, and you'll come in for that thing. So it's really, a lot of it's about, you're job hunting. So if you don't get that one job that we're the HR department for that day, maybe there'll be something else down the road. So do well at that one, leave it, forget about it, and then, maybe there's something else. Because it's money, every audition's like money in the bank. It should be.
That was true for me too, actually. In the casting process of Nobody Walks, there were like 6 actors, if not more, that I auditioned that were totally not right for the part, but that I think about all the time. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So we have some time, I think, for a few questions. You have a mic there. Anyone want to ask anything? I think you're just gonna pass the mic around because this is also streaming live, so they want mic'd questions.
Okay, the question I have is, thank you all for everything you've been saying. And okay, let's suppose that you'd like to create a film and it's all unknown actors. What is the probability in terms of distribution of the film? How difficult is it to get a film distributed? Let's suppose you're even somehow magically able to get it financed. That's my question.
She said Beasts of the Southern Wild. So yeah, does anyone want to?
Well,
chime in?
just one. I'll talk first just a tiny bit about funding, not being a producer, but I funded You Won't Miss Me with 2 grants, and it's not. There's no like cha-ching. I didn't make any money making that movie. I haven't seen any money. It has a very small distributor. It did go to Sundance, which definitely enabled me, I think, to be able to make Nobody Walks, which was still small but bigger. But there is a world of grants, which is very small. Like I can list them on my one hand here. But that's how Beast was funded by CineReach. And I got a NYFF grant, New York State Council of the Arts, because it was sort of more of an experimental feature. And I think even in this world, saying I'm going to make a feature film with non-actors or unknown actors is out there. So, but then I think, in terms of, go ahead, Bruce.
I'm sorry. There is now Kickstarter and Indiegogo, these crowdfunding sources, and they're campaigns. You really have to work them like a campaign. But, I have a bunch of friends who've raised $50,000, $100,000, on Kickstarter campaigns. So that's another option that didn't exist several years ago.
Yeah, the distribution. You asked about distribution. Distribution is
A nightmare.
Distribution is like more money, more problems. Less money, more problems. Right? I mean, there are a lot of platforms now that you can distribute on, whether your film has stars in it, whether your film doesn't have stars in it. So the question is, of course, you want to go to the best festivals. You want to start off at Sundance if you can get into Sundance. If you can't, then you try the other festivals, and there's all these levels that you start at the top and work down. If you get lucky, you've got that one film that happens to be that film that year that everybody climbs onto, great, fantastic. Whether you make money, different story, but there's a lot of different ways to get films out. I mean, does anybody want to? I mean, there's independent ways you can get stuff up on your own website if it's really not working through the classic. I mean, listen, the distribution world has shrunk incredibly. So, just like everything in the indie world and the economy in general. So what Bruce is also getting at is that there is a level where a lot of filmmakers feel like they have to stay with their films for a long time after they're done in order to get them into the world.
Even when you get distribution.
Yeah.
I think, listen, the bottom line is if you have a passion for making movies, you should make that movie, especially if you maybe do have access to whatever amount of funding and you have your friends who are hopefully serious and committed as well. The problem with movies is that you have to practice your art. If you're a painter, you don't wait around for MoMA to ask to do an exhibit. I mean, you have to make films in order to learn how to work with actors, to learn how the equipment works, to learn what you can get out of a 5D or whatever, to shoot Super 8. Be creative. This is an art form. We forget that. Over and over, we go to these panels and festivals and everything, and everybody is trying to get that breakthrough film. You know what? It's pretty rare that you have the breakthrough film. But I always say, what about sustainability? And then you get into environmental issues. No, but, this is America. You expect to be, Starbucks or Apple. Well, what about the mom and pop store that we're always paying lip service to? Make small films. You can distribute them. You can have a play at Rooftop Films. Try to get in there. Start relationships. Play them in the local bar. That's what I used to do. Honey, I've got to go to the bar again. No, but the point is you you build your communities. This is about communities, and don't let Hollywood conduct your affairs. Build your own community and just start making the films with integrity and as we've said, be nice to everyone, and you will have a film under your belt, and you'll show it to people, and then you can talk about your next film, and you have something to show. So
there is a lot of neurosis that surrounds this, because this is the big subject that every 5 seconds there's a panel about building your crowd and getting out there and distributing your film. But I talk to a lot of young filmmakers, a lot of student filmmakers, and I always tell them not to even worry about distribution. It's because there is a point where it's like, you might get some names in your film, but again, unless their last name is Cruz or Kidman or whatever, and even then, that's like this level here where those films get released, But there's this whole giant level underneath there that those films may not get released. If they do get released, they may go nowhere. But if you're at a level where you're making things that are so independent that you don't have the money for these giant stars, you're right. Make the best film you can. Love the craft and make it, and you never know.
And can I just say one thing? I just want to add, and if you make one and it's like not that good, then make another. It's like it's relentless and exhausting, but it's like that itch that you want to scratch because it's delicious to scratch it and it feels good, So
I must say that from a casting perspective, if you come to us and ask us to help you with casting and you are brand new in the marketplace, it's really helpful for us to be able to point to previous work, to show a reel, to have some examples. Because if an actor is being asked to play the lead, they're going to want to know who they're working with, and they're going to want to see evidence that you have talent and that you can handle actors. And if I have nothing, it's really an uphill battle for us to cast it. And you're not going to make your movie unless you got your cast.
But if you have one independent, on the heels of that, if you have one independent film that you made with non-actors or theater actors in New York that you made for not a lot of money, but you practiced on your 5D and it looks great, that actor's going to be like, that's something actually to show, I think, people that they will respect if it's good. And that could be your third film,
It's fine.
Hi everyone. I want to ask a question is from a young filmmaker point of view, because some of my professor told me you must need to find an agent no matter you're actress, you're a new actress or a new filmmaker. So I want to ask you guys, is it you must need to find really valuable agent before you do everything?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I just concerned about it because I want to do it myself. So I was concerned is that you must need to find some really good agent before you start all your,
Does anybody want to take that one?
Yeah, honestly,
No, I'd say quit that class, first of all.
No. Look, the reality is, in order to find an agent, you have to do something first. I mean, it's just...
You have to not just do something, you have to do a lot. You have to make a lot of money. You have to be somebody who is bankable to be a filmmaker who has an agent.
I made 2 independent features for no money, and the second one was at Sundance, and then on the third film, when we had written the script and name talent was attached, that's when agents started hounding me and being like, "Oh, we're interested in signing you." And it wasn't until even after I had a film at Sundance, it was like, and I still, my approach still to agents is it's very much like they'll get you a meeting, but then it's all you. Completely, and it's all not to depend on them in a sense. You're making the relationship.
It seems to me, what do you guys think? Doesn't it seem like sometimes, just to take it seriously for one moment, that a manager is a good place to start? I mean, there's this subtle difference, but it feels like a manager is maybe somebody who's more inclined to work directly with your needs and build a career. Whereas an agent
you're talking about for a filmmaker or for actors?
I don't know. I'm just always aware that it's usually for an actor. I don't know. Is there a manager? Filmmakers have managers.
But you're giving
They
them,
do.
as soon as you make any money, you're giving them like 11%.
Yeah.
And so I just have agents. I don't have managers. I have TV agents and film agents. And the manager for me is like, I don't make enough money to start shelling it out to everybody when, I do make money, God forbid. So it just doesn't make sense for me. But I think in terms of building your career, a lot of managers will sign on early and help introduce you to people that then, or maybe even help you like a casting director or whatever, because they do have access to that.
But the short answer to your question is no. You do not need to. You want cream always rises to the top. I mean, crap rises to the top too sometimes, I guess. But, once you do that thing, whatever it is, or the second or third thing, people will start coming to you. I mean, yes, you can be out there hounding and pounding on doors and that sort of thing. But in order to, if I understood your question correctly, to start doing anything, finding an agent first, absolutely not.
Anyone else? Where's the microphone? Do we have the microphone person? Oh, well. Was it in front here? Oh, go ahead. You choose. Go ahead. That's fine.
Do you have psychological profiles or studies when you cast, or you work with psychologists, or in terms of types of people you cast?
As in crazy actors or non-crazy actors?
What do you mean like?
No, because like some film professors, they even have databases and they study the face of the person and they say this person is for those roles particular. This
What are these
takes like a psychologist, a psychiatrist.
What school? I think everybody's at the same. I mean, have you ever heard of that? I've never heard of that.
I've never heard of that practice. Well, I think she's saying, I think you're talking about casting by type, right? So do you profile actors? Like that guy's always going to play the doctor.
No. In fact, whenever a character breakdown, which is essentially the job notice that we send out, is written for us, or someone like an intern or somebody writes it, anything that speaks to a prototype, I take out. You'll see it much more in TV. TV moves at a much faster pace, and they'll say, Joe the bartender, blah blah blah. Think Ray Milland in The Lost Weekend, and everyone go, oh, okay, great. Anything like that for a film where I get a character breakdown, I take all of that stuff out because I don't. Agents are already relatively okay. They're extremely limited and not uncreative in their thinking. So the last thing I want to do is and they all ask. They say, who's the prototype? Who's the prototype? I'll say, why don't you read the script over the weekend, and then you can tell me some ideas that you have. I can say things like, it's a woman, she's in her 20s, whatever, but I really try to stay away from anything that will make the process less creative, and frankly easier for a talent agent to wrap his or her head around. I mean, I'll tell you just a quick anecdotal thing. We're working on a film, it's about Los Alamos. So Robert Oppenheimer is a character in the film, and this is like what we battle against, right? So, obviously, this agent, someone I know, I sent the script to. I would love some ideas for these different roles. Blah blah blah, and so this script was written by a friend of mine, and I read it for a number of years in many different versions, and so Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, to me it was always Oppenheimer, and so I'm on the phone with his agent, and he says, "Who's your prototype for Robert?" And I'm like, "Who's Robert?" I'm racking my. I'm sorry. I said to him, I don't know who's Robert. And he looks. I can tell he's looking at his thing. Robert Oppenheimer. And I said, well, I think the real guy would be the prototype, I guess. He wants me to say, it's Liev Schreiber, it's whatever. And there was this long silence on the end, and I said, you don't know who Robert Oppenheimer is, do you? And to his credit, he said, no, I don't. I missed that class or whatever. Yeah, right? So aside from all the petty things I could say about that, it's just, you want people to think, create. Yeah, he did read the script. He doesn't never. I sent him a link to. May I Google that for you? So you want. I personally, I don't know if Ellen agree, don't want to make things easy for. I want to make things easy in the sense of. When we're talking about getting stars, let's say, or getting named talent, I like to make things easy. I like to make things easy for the directors by saying to whoever's Jeremy Renner's manager, tell me if he wants to do a movie of this scale right now after he does another Bourne movie, and she'll say, maybe send it to me and I'll read it, or I'd probably not, and I can go back to Rye or whomever and say, yeah, you know what, not right now for Jeremy Renner or whatever. But in terms of the casting process and character work, whatever you want to call it, I like people to come to us with ideas.
Mm-hmm. No, actually, I think we were out of time, right? Yeah, sorry. We're going to have to wrap it up. Sorry we couldn't get to more questions. But thank you, everyone, for doing this, and thank you for coming out.